Hello, I'm Rambatu.
And I'm Shan Karbanda, and welcome to our podcast, Weekly Dose of High School, where we'll be guiding you through the life of a high school student while speaking to knowledgeable people in the industry.
Welcome to our 16th episode. Today we are here with Jay Subbiah, an incoming freshman at Northwestern University studying neuroscience. In today's episode, we'll be hearing Jay speak about his college application process and why he ended up enrolling at Northwestern University.
So before we get started, would you like to add anything else, Jay?
Nope, I'm ready to get started.
All right, without further ado, let's begin. So, Jay, how competitive is the neuroscience major? It isn't a major that is as competitive as CS or engineering. So, how hard is it for students to get accepted into big colleges like Johns Hopkins or Brown, which are widely known as one of the best colleges for medicine?
Yeah, so when it comes to talking about the competitiveness of various majors, it's important to note that a lot of colleges don't admit by major, or at least they won't say that they will. So it's hard to talk about neuroscience and maybe like biology as majors in comparison to like CS because a lot of schools like Berkeley have separate CS schools, right? Berkeley has EECS,
Mhm.
and then they have letters and sciences. So a lot of colleges, they say that they don't admit by major. But in reality, there obviously has to be some sort of impact that your major has on your application and stuff like that. And I would say neuroscience falls right between the tier of like biology and psychology, just around the rest of those like sort of STEM science sort of majors. So, at a college like Johns Hopkins, if you're applying regular decision, if you look at the percentage acceptance rate, if you look at stuff like that, you can get a pretty good indication of how hard it is to be specifically a neuroscience major. And that applies to a lot of other majors as well.
Okay.
Jay, as you may be well aware that Northwestern offers like an opportunity for its applications to ED. So there are rumors for certain schools that like give like a ED benefit or boost to like one big name that comes to mind is U Chicago, which gives like a big boost to the ED applicants. So do you think this holds true for Northwestern as well?
Yeah, this is actually a big part of Northwestern's sort of academic process and their admissions sort of philosophy. Both UChicago and Northwestern have a lot bigger emphasis on ED applicants. In fact, like if you were to look at this past year, they only accept like 4% at regular decision, whereas ED is anywhere from like 20 to 25%. And you can't just look at the base numbers because obviously more qualified applicants are going to apply ED and general people are just going to apply RD. But it is important to note that at a lot of top colleges, I would say most of like, Johns Hopkins, Brown, so like most of the Ivies, they all definitely do put a bigger emphasis on ED. ED definitely helps because it shows the colleges that you're committed to going there and that it's really your top choice.
Right. And out of this, like what percentage do you think or like approximately takes into effect of how many recruited athletes and legacies are there?
Yeah, athlete admissions are very different. So for instance, because athletes' GPAs and scores aren't on par with the average applicant, what a lot of top colleges do, like Harvard, is they admit their athletes the year before. So that's why you'll hear a lot about how athletes declare that they're going to a college before, they're already in their senior year. And that's because they do it then they take a gap year usually or something along those lines. So in general, I wouldn't say athletes really affect the acceptance rate that much.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, if you don't mind me asking, did you ED to Northwestern or did
Yeah,
you just regularly? Oh, sorry. Okay.
yeah, I applied DD.
Okay, good. So do you think that colleges would prioritize one's weighted GPA over the unweighted GPA during the review process?
I think it varies school to school. So, I mean, at basis especially, we have a big grade inflation sort of problem. So when admissions officers looking at your portfolio, if they're looking at your GPA, they'd probably consider both equally. But what they do, and this is something to consider when you're applying to colleges, is that they're not just going to consider in a vacuum. They'll also probably, compare it to what they know about your school compared to your peers. And from there, they'll get a better example. So I think at basis, especially given that we have a bigger weighted GPA than a lot of other schools, they're probably going to look at our weighted GPA first and say, okay, this is indicative of the student and the type of classes they're taking. But let's say an admissions officer is going between like students at basis and sees that they all have, 4.0 unweighted GPAs, then they might end up looking at weighted GPAs to, see which students really stand out.
Okay, so since BASIS offers plenty of APs, do you think that colleges would prioritize or would kind of prefer the unweighted over the weighted GPA?
I think, well, I think it depends on what your GPA is looking at, depends on the college you're applying to. They look at them about equally, but I'm just saying, like, in terms of basis, because there might not that, like, because of the grade inflation here, and because, our GPA is kind of a lot higher on average than the
Yeah,
other school, they might just look at unweighted as a better, example of what our classwork really is and how hard it really is and how good a student's really doing.
but they do consider weighted GPA in the process
Yeah,
as well. Okay.
yeah, definitely. I mean, GPA isn't considered that much in terms of your application, but when people just run down the, application, look at the first, GPA is a big part of whether or not they're really going to read into your application or they're just going to toss it aside.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm assuming Jay Northwestern it was your first choice because you ED'd there, and may you explain like why you decided to ED or why you decided Northwestern would be your first choice?
Yeah, so going into the application process about the same time you guys are right now, right? August. I had Northwestern on my mind. It's not a big name compared to, like any of the Ivies in the West Coast, but in the Midwest and the East Coast, it's pretty well recognized that I have a lot of like family members there. And in fact, one of my close family friends attended Northwestern for pre-med. And so I had sort of a good understanding of the college and what it provided. And it came down to, at least when I was looking at my list of colleges, which I'm sure you guys are making too, it came down to three main colleges for me, which met all of my major criteria. And these criteria were things like I wanted to be close to a city, but not in a city because, colleges in a city can kind of be a hassle and they're often kind of hard to live in. But you still have the opportunities of a city if you're right next to one. I wanted a college that wasn't, just academics. I wanted some fun, some livelihood. No offense to you, Chicago, but there's a reason people call it where fun goes to die. And Northwestern has at least, football teams in the Big Ten and whatnot. So I wanted a balance. I want something like that. And then at the same time, I wanted flexibility. Going into college, a lot of people are sure of their major. I'm still sure of my major, but I want the ability to switch majors, to look at other majors, to pursue other career paths if I want to. And Northwestern is one of the biggest schools known for, being able to double, even triple major if you'd like to. So you can get an economics degree, you can get a STEM degree, you can do anything. And for those reasons, Northwestern ended up being at the top of my list. I was really debating between it, UPenn, and Stanford. And then I was able to knock off UPenn, and then I was just left with Northwestern and Stanford. And between the two, you know, it was really the case where if you apply ED Northwestern, um, it's a lot safer of a bet than applying REA Stanford, where you don't really get any benefit, and then you just have to apply regular decision to both. So I just figured, numbers wise, as far as everything goes, might as well just ED Northwestern. And that's what I ended up doing.
Hmm. Well said. And so, if you mind sharing, what other schools did you apply to, and how many did you apply to in total?
Yeah, so I was planning on applying to something like 30 colleges, but as I'm sure you know, when you get the ED offer, you have to rescind all your other applications. So I
Right.
ended up only sending out, I think, about 4 or 5 applications. The applications were to obviously Northwestern, then Baylor, which was one of my safeties. It's a decent pre-med school, not the best. Case Western, specifically Case Western's BSMD program. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the BSMD program, but it's like combining,
It's a dual program, right?
yeah, dual
Yeah.
program to get auto admitted into medical school, very
Yeah.
competitive. I applied to that. I also applied to the University of Rochester's BSMD program, and I applied to the UCs before I got my applications back. And out of those, I got some of the results back. I had to rescind all the application results that I'd gotten, like that hadn't gotten back to me by the
Mhm.
time I got my acceptance letter. But I actually did forget to rescind my UC Davis application, and I got in. So I guess that counts. And then I also got into Baylor because I got that pretty early. And then for Case Western, I didn't get in, but I got offered for an interview for their BSMB program, which those interviews are pretty rare. They're really hard to get. So I assume I would have gotten in, but I had to rescind and not attend that, which is a bummer, but that's the way things go.
You just mentioned the Case Western Reserve. So certain schools, like I find it very peculiar. Like some people get into highly ranked school like Harvard, but
Yeah.
then like get rejected from like UC Davis. So how does that work
Yeah.
out?
Well, there's two things that go into it. The first is yield rejection. Are you guys familiar with yield
Yeah.
rejection? Yeah.
Mhm.
So if you're just so overqualified, the college sees no chance that you're going to get into that school. They're just not going to admit you. Because why would they? I have friends. I know someone who got into MIT and MET at Berkeley,
Mhm.
and she got rejected from, I think, UCI and UC Davis. So,
I
um,
see.
that's just the way things go. Colleges can act like that. But honestly, if you are a top sort of candidate at that level, don't worry about it too much. But then the other side of things is the fact that colleges are kind of a gamble, and different colleges look for different things. So another one of my friends, he's one of the smartest dudes I know. He got into Stanford, he got into several other really high CS programs, but he
Mhm.
also got rejected from places like Georgia Tech. He got rejected from I think Purdue. He got rejected from a lot of mid-tier colleges, which don't typically yield reject. And so I guess it goes to show that, different colleges are looking for different things. Just because you get rejected from really good colleges doesn't mean that you're not going to get into one at all. But yeah, a lot of admissions is luck. A lot of admissions is specific. But you just have to go into it hoping for the best.
Got it. Thank you.
So Jay, I've looked for the acceptance rates for neuroscience at many of the colleges' websites, but I haven't really found anything. So do I have to subscribe to a college to get this information?
Yeah, well, going back to what I said earlier, I don't think they really admit by major. I don't think they really consider that. And so that's probably the reason why they won't disclose their neuroscience acceptance rates or their acceptance rates for a lot of other majors for that matter, unless it is a separate college like I said, EECS at Berkeley. Um, that said, one thing that I would say for you to do if you want a good indication of whether or not it's going to be an easier or harder school for a certain major is to look at the percentage of a certain major at the school, right? If it's a very large percentage major at the school, that can tell you something about what the acceptance rate is going to be like or how competitive it's going to be. Whereas if it's a very small select amount of people and it's a school known for that major, you can kind of tell that it's going to be a little bit more competitive. That would be my advice if they do disclose that information.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, so Jay, you may be aware of the fact that some of the supplements for some universities are very unique in a way. So, like for example, USC, University of Southern California, has some unique supplementary questions like, "What is your favorite food?" or "What is your favorite TV show slash book?" So, what do you think colleges are looking for in these answers? Because they're only expecting one word or one phrase answers, so you can't even explain yourself why you chose an answer. So, is there a way you can like nail these questions?
Yeah, I mean, USC is known for having very unique questions. I remember writing my USC app in like December or like November, and I was laughing at like these questions. I was like, why do they want to know my favorite character, my favorite food? But the truth is, for these questions, they don't really care. It's just fun. It's just to get to know you. There's no wrong answer, really. I guess that the only way these could probably affect your application is if you put like some horrible answer like your favorite book is written by like some like extremist thinker like Hitler or something like yes that will probably affect your admission chances, but
Mhm.
saying that your favorite show is Breaking Bad is not going to change a thing. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. So you may also be aware of the fact of the word spike, like having a spike in your extracurriculars, where like you've achieved a lot in a particular field. So like naming a couple of examples would be like having a spike in music would be you performing at like Carnegie Hall. Having a spike in like CS would be you attending like the training camp, which is offered to the USICO participants who reach like the highest level. So do you believe you had such a spike in your extracurriculars at the time of your application?
In terms of neuroscience, I feel like I haven't heard of this term spike before, but in terms of neuroscience, I feel like only two categories can really fall under this, and that's either doing like USABO or something along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
and like, becoming a finalist or semifinalist. And then the other one would probably be like publishing a really fantastic paper. And I haven't done any of those. I will say the closest thing I have to that is that, I'm still working on this since my application, but I'm working to publish a paper, pretty comprehensive paper in Columbia. That would be the closest thing I can think of in my application to a spike. I competed at like some sort of local competitions. You might have heard of the Brain Bee. I placed
Yeah.
Yeah.
fourth in that. But again, I don't find those to be that impressive. I don't think those are considered spikes.
So, like we all know that we go to like a very competitive high school, and where everyone's doing all sorts of stuff. So, what's the best advice that you would give to people who go to competitive high schools to stand out?
What I would say is that you really have to tailor your application, right, to your college. And what this means is you might not have as good, grades, you might not have as good accomplishments as one of your peers, but that's fine. Because at the end of the day, the college is looking for different candidates, right? It's looking for different people who fit their college. Just because someone, for instance, has, become a finalist at USABO or USICO, that doesn't necessarily mean that, you're not going to get into the same college as them. All that means is that you have to highlight different parts of your application, right, to help appeal to a college, right? So yeah, a spike could be really important in application, but if you show a genuine interest in CS through another way, through a training camp, right? So rather than a training camp, let's say you worked on your own, you started your own CS startup, or you interned at like multiple CS, companies. That could show to the college that you not only are very interested in CS, but also you're very good at CS, right?
Right.
And just building your application in that way, that can really help you succeed. And also, one thing that I feel like a lot of people overlook is your writing. Your supplement matters a lot. It matters a lot. Your common application essay matters a lot, like your personal statement.
Mhm.
You can be extremely qualified, but if you write a bad personal statement and somebody else writes a good personal statement that speaks specifically to a college and their goals and things like that, they will get into that college and the other person will not, right? So don't look at specific parts of an application as an end all be all. Just look at it as a whole, right? Look at it as a whole, see what you're telling through your application and try your best to like deliver that message to the college.
Got it. And since you mentioned the fact of internships, we tend to like ask all of our guests, what advice would you give to like high school students on finding an internship? Because like it's very competitive, even for a high school student or even like a college freshman to land an internship.
Definitely. Especially I would say in terms of the medical field. I'm sure Veron is familiar with this. It's really hard to find internships because
Yeah.
there's a lot of rules against people under 18. And commuting to a facility, to a lab is often difficult, especially because you're limited by distance. Whereas CS, at least you can work online.
Right.
So yeah, it is very difficult to get an internship, and it shouldn't be a big deal if you don't get one, because what you have to realize is the vast majority of people who get admitted even to top colleges probably don't have internships on their resume, or at least a decent amount of people. So it's not that big of a deal, but my advice would be just to reach out, right? So if you are familiar with someone who works in a field that you want to get into, reach out to them, right? Like whether it's one of your family friends, whether it's um, a graduate of your school, whether it's one of your classmates, right? You just have to really reach out. One of the thing that colleges, one of the biggest parts of going to college is making connections. That's what you'll hear. The reason that business majors go to good colleges is to make connections. That's the point of their degree. And that's what you have to do throughout high school too, if you want to get these internships, right? And sometimes if you just find yourself not being able to find anything, I would just say cold email. Email a bunch of professors in your area. Go look at LinkedIn and email a bunch of, different companies. Keep on looking because chances are, let's say you throw in 100 emails, right? You're probably going to get one back. And that one email back, it's worth more than those 99 emails, which led to nothing, right? But then again, don't get caught up in looking for an internship because if you can't find one, it's not the end of the day. It's not that big of a deal. But that would be my advice. Just look for people that you know. Look through connections, look through mutual friends, things like that. And I'm sure you'll be able to find something.
Well said.
Oh,
Thank
sorry. And just to follow up to your response, you think if I start an internship probably like this month or next month, do you think I'll be too late, or am I perfectly fine?
Well, it depends, because if you want to look at your application, you have 10 activities, right? You have 10 activities
Right.
to put on your common application, right? And of those activities, you don't want to waste them, right? So
Yep.
if a month and a half of whatever you're doing is good enough for you that you would put it in that 10, then go ahead. But don't force it, because you don't want to, you want to pick those 10 wisely. And one thing to note is that you can change your application between your, uh early decision, early acceptance versus your
Right.
regular decision, right? So obviously you can definitely put this if you continue doing it on your regular decision application, right? Because you have been doing that for multiple months at that point. But if you've only done it for a little bit and you haven't accomplished much, by the time you're writing your early decision applications, just don't put it in your top 10, right? One thing you can do, though, is colleges offer inside of the Common Application a opportunity to talk about, more about your activities, right? To talk about other circumstances, things like that.
Would
And
that
in
be like the additional section?
yeah, the additional
Okay.
info, that was the word I was searching for. In that section, you can definitely go ahead and write, I'm currently working on this. That's what I put. I said I'm currently I'm still conducting research at this institution, and I'll probably do that through this date, right? And I wrote that all so that the colleges can better understand, what this commitment is, how big of a time it is to you, and like how much big of a commitment it is to you, and stuff like that.
Okay, Jay. So you've kind of already answered this question before, but how beneficial do you think publishing your research essays is? Like, do you think, oh, sorry.
No, yeah, that's a good question. Research, when I was applying, I definitely thought, having a paper in hand is a huge benefit, but in reality, uh, it's not, because having a published paper, right, could be the equivalent of just working at a lab for, a couple months, right? These two things mean the same thing to a lot of colleges, which is you did research work and you did quality research work. All that a publication shows is that you've gone so far in your research work that you've been able to publish, and that perhaps, your research was of such quality that it could be published, right? But if you are able to prove that in a different way, that would be basically the same thing to a college. But, in general, obviously, having a research paper or research essay published is a big advantage. You'd probably be able to put it as one of your additional materials inside of your common application if you'd really like. Um, so yeah, I definitely do think it's a good thing, but like a lot of other, it's not unique, right? It's not something that's absolute. You can get the same sort of, a college can get the same sort of benefit from your application through a different activity or through a different internship or something like that.
Okay, so, but do you think I would have an upper edge if I just published more, or probably like two or three research essays, or just one enough?
I mean, yeah, yeah, I mean, this is a positive. I don't think they can view it as a negative. You will get an upper edge if you publish more, obviously, that makes sense.
Yeah,
Um,
but I've heard that during the college application review, like
yeah.
they've only reviewed your application for like 5 to 10 minutes. So do you think they have time to review all of your publications?
Oh, well, if you just briefly summarize or mention that you published 3 papers, I think that does the job.
Okay.
Obviously, they're not going to press on a link and go read your publication.
Okay.
You can put the title there, and some colleges, if they take the time and they're looking at your, application in greater detail, they might do that. Um, but yeah, you don't want to waste your admissions officer's time, but at the same time, you don't want to hinder yourself because you just think you're wasting their time. It's a balance.
Thank you.
Okay, so a couple of follow-ups to your responses there, Jay. First of all, you mentioned like just now, you don't waste your admission officer's time. So do you think it's like good to submit extra letter of recommendations? Because I've heard mixed opinion on this. On one hand, I've heard that submitting them will like only help your application because it's showing something good about you. But on the other hand, I've also heard like if it's an average recommendation at a top-notch school, it may actually hinder your application since they'll be frustrated by reading the same thing that they've already read in the 2 required letter recommendations.
Yeah, I would say that that is definitely true, and I've heard that a lot. Definitely don't add an additional um don't add an additional recommendation unless it's really good. Me personally, I did add an additional recommendation, and also never go past one unless it's just like the two most beautiful, recommendations you've ever seen. I did personally add one because I got a very good recommendation out of this one professor I'd worked with. And I thought it was definitely going to be stronger than my, two basis recommendations. So I figured I might add it. But you never want to add an average recommendation. You want a recommendation that's going to stand out. Because, if you read an average recommendation, right, if the admission officer sees this, not only is it that, you're taking up their time, but also they look at it from like this point of view where it's like, you thought it was necessary to add an entire other recommendation to your application, right? And this is average. So what does that show about the applicant, right? Is this like, they're like, is this the best they can offer? An average recommendation? Like at that point, just leave it, right? So yeah, only if it's really good.
Got it. And a second follow-up to your previous responses, do you think like research programs that make you pay money to do research are considered valuable and as prestigious under the eyes of admission officers as compared to like doing a research by cold emailing or contacting a local professor at a university?
I guess it's about the quality of research, right? Because the college is not going to come and care about how you got that research for the most part. It's more about what you did with that research. If you're doing the same exact research, and for one, it was part of a program that you paid for, and for the other, you just cold emailed a professor, I don't think it makes that big of a difference. And I don't think a lot of admissions officers care that much. That said, the thing about paying for research and like research opportunities which involve, paying, is that sometimes they're just not that good quality, right? A lot of the best research opportunities, a lot of the highest quality, and a lot of the ones that are going to stand out are those that happen through just cold emailing and working at a, university of some sort. That said, if you get the similar opportunity and you do similar research at an institution where you pay, um, it's not that big of a difference, right? So it's more about what you're doing with the research, not how you got it.
Got it.
Well, that's it for today for episode 16 of Weekly Dose of High School. Hope you guys enjoyed listening to Jay answer some important questions for students who might want to pursue in the med field and overall speak about its application experience. Make sure to tune in for part 2 of this episode.
Also, if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to our podcast, whether you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, or YouTube. We're on all those platforms and we upload weekly episodes. So make sure to subscribe so you never miss an upload. Until then, take it easy, guys.